The last complement of prudence, called cautiousness, which meets and evades the impediments of virtue, was necessarily also possessed by the Queen of Angels in a greater perfection than by these spirits, for her exalted wisdom and love which accompanied it incited her to such caution and foresight that no event which might be an impediment in the exercise of the most perfect virtue found her unprepared and unprovided with a counter remedy. And since the enemy, as will be described later on, not being able to find any hold in her passions, exerted himself so much in placing elaborate and unheard of obstacles in her way, the most prudent virgin had occasion to practice this caution many times, thereby exciting the wonder of the apostles. On account of the cautious discretion of the most holy Mary, the demon pursued her with a terrified wrath and envy, burning with a desire to know by what power she foiled such powerful machinations and cunning snares as he devised in order to hinder or draw her away. For in every instance he was vanquished, and had to be witness of the most perfect exercise of all that is virtuous in all her undertakings and works. After having mentioned and described the parts and complements of prudence, let us also examine the different species or kinds into which it can be divided, according to the object or the ends to which it is applied. Prudence can be used either in our own actions and affairs, or for the affairs of others, and thus arise two kinds of prudence, directing the activity which concerns ourselves and that which concerns our neighbors. That which governs one's own particular activity is called anarchic prudence, and in reference to the Queen of Heaven, it is not necessary to say more in proof of her having exercised this kind of prudence than what has already been said above, about the manner in which she regulated her own life. The prudence which regulates the government of others is called polyarchic. This is subdivided into 4 kinds, according to 4 different ways of governing others. The first kind is that which facilitates the government of countries by just and useful laws. It is proper to kings, princes, and monarchs, and of all those whose authority is supreme. The second kind is called the political prudence, which has its name from the fact that it teaches the right government of cities or republics. The third is called economical prudence, which shows how to govern and manage domestic affairs of the family or particular homes. The fourth is military prudence, which is adapted to prosecution of wars and management of armies. None of these different kinds of prudence was wanting in our great Queen. All were given to her as habits in the instant of her conception and of her sanctification, so that no grace, no virtue, no perfection, which might exalt and beautify her above all creatures, might be wanting in her. The Most High made her an archive and depositary of all his gifts, an example to all the rest of creation, thus giving an exhibition of his power and greatness, so that in the whole heavenly Jerusalem it might be known what he could and would do for a mere creature. And in Mary these sublime habits of virtue did not lie idle, for all of them she exercised in the course of her life on many occasions, as they offered themselves. As regards economical prudence, it is well known how incomparable was government of her domestic affairs, when living with her spouse Joseph, and with her most holy Son, for in his education and service she acted with such prudence as was befitting the most occult mystery which God entrusted to men, as I shall show in another place, according to my understanding and ability. She exercised also the governing or monarchical prudence as the sole empress of the Church, teaching, advising, and directing the sacred apostles in the primitive church, thus helping to lay its foundation and to initiate the laws, rites, and ceremonies most necessary and useful for its propagation and establishment. Though she obeyed the apostles in particular matters and consulted especially St. Peter as the vicar of Christ and the head of the church, and St. John as her chaplain, yet they and all the Christians asked her advice and followed it in the general and particular matters relating to the government of the church. She also taught the Christian kings and princes who approached her for counsel, for many of them sought to know her after the ascension of her most holy Son into heaven. Among them especially can be mentioned the 3 kings of the East, when they came to adore the child. She explained and instructed them in all that they must do for their states, with such light and clearness that she was their star and guide on the way to eternity. They returned to their country enlightened, consoled, and astonished at the wisdom, prudence, and sweetness of the words which they had heard from the mouth of a tender maiden. In witness of all the high praise which this queen deserved in this regard, it is enough to hear her own words. By me kings reign, and lawgivers decree just things. By me princes rule.